Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Welcome to episode 191 of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, and I am back today with my co-host, Holly. Hey, Holly.
Hey.
So we are going to continue our little series, which kind of happened by accident.
Yeah. I like it.
We didn't really plan to have a series about leading different things, but it's kind of turning into that. So
yeah, I like it.
Have talked about leading. Well, the first one we did was leading meetings that people won't hate. Big, important topic. And then we talked about leading events and retreats. And so today we thought we would talk about leading small groups, because we have a lot of women in our community that are involved in churches. And you may have the opportunity, or you may already be leading a small group, or maybe you've thought about starting a small group and you have no idea where to start. And so I know we've had people come into our Facebook group and ask questions about small groups several times. And you and I have we've both led a lot of groups, and you like oversee small groups now at your church, right?
Yeah. So I'm the director of small groups at our church location. Yeah.
So you have a little bit of experience in this area.
I do.
So we thought, let's talk about starting and leading a small group today.
Yeah.
So let's start just by defining, what do we actually mean by small group? Because maybe just in case you aren't familiar with what we're referring to here, let's figure out what we're talking about.
Well, I think in this day and age, it's always important to define exactly what you're talking about, because people have different definitions for the same word. So
exactly.
So lots of churches, as we've said, have what they call small groups. They could also be Bible studies. Some of them just call groups, life groups. At one of our churches a long time ago, they called them shepherd groups. So you can have any kind of different name for it.
Community groups. That's another term I've used. I've heard.
At the church in Guatemala, they call them cell groups. So, any type of name you want to put on that, but it's usually a group of people who are gathering together around a particular topic or study. And often this is where you're going to create deeper relationships than what you're going to get in a normal Sunday service or meeting once a week with the greater church community. So most churches, or many churches who have small groups, consider it to be part of their overall discipleship process, because people are doing life together in the context of small groups. I know at our church, we say that life change happens in the context of groups, and we define that as small groups or dream team. So serving within the church. So life change is going to happen within the context of community, because when you're in a group with other people, they're going to challenge you. They're going to do life differently than you. They're going to have different hangups, different personalities, all those types of things. And that's how we grow together. Yeah. And that's how we grow in maturity. So that's what we're talking about. Yeah.
I was just, an analogy came to my mind, and I think of it almost kind of like the difference between when you're dating and then when you get married. Going to church with people is kind of like dating someone. Like, you just sort of get to know them on a surface level. You see them on a weekly basis, maybe something like that. But then once you get married, you're like in the weeds of life. Yeah. And in small groups, you're not living with everybody else, obviously, most of the time, unless you're in some sort of commune. But But you're definitely like seeing people, you know, in a deeper context than that church context, or when you're serving side by side and you start to notice, oh, this person does this really annoying thing. And like, I have to serve with them. Like, how do I still show them love and care for them and be Christ-like, even when we disagree, or even when there's things that are annoying about someone. So I think it's hard to really pin down exactly what discipleship means and looks like. Yeah, we've struggled with that. My husband and I have had a lot of conversations around like, what is discipleship exactly? How can it happen in churches? But I definitely think small groups are a part of it. And most of the churches, I think in our current context, at least in our Western culture, have some form of small groups or Bible studies or something where people are meeting on a more intimate level than they do on a Sunday service level. So,
well, and I think too, if I think back to my deepest friendships, my longest lasting friendships, the ones that, you know, have stood the test of time as well as have been super pivotal in my life, they all seem to be ones that those relationships grew and got deeper through small groups. I mean, if you think about it, that's how our friendship started. We had a family couples group. We also did women's Bible studies together that you started. And so it's out of those familial groups as well as women's groups that we have some of our longest lasting and deepest friendships. So, I mean, if you're looking for community and you feel like I don't have any friends, this is a great way to start. So
Yes. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So we are going to talk about two kind of big things here. We're going to talk about starting a small group or Bible study, whatever you want to call it. And then we're going to talk about leading groups. So let's kick off with the starting. And I think what you just said is such a good segue into this. So thank you.
You're welcome.
We did not plan that. But that's actually why I started the small group when I started it. I had two reasons. One, I really sensed God was leading me to start something. And in particular, I wanted to start something that could potentially be for someone who was newer to faith or still exploring faith. That was kind of on my heart. But in the same token, I was also really wanting a deeper community. And it's so easy to sit and complain or be frustrated when you don't have that. But really, sometimes it takes that need, you realizing that need that you have, and then being willing to step up and say, I will fill that need, and it will fill a need for myself, but it will also fill a need for a lot of other people as well. So,
well, you're not the only one. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we think
you're not the only one feeling this way.
When we're in that position, we think, oh, everybody has friends. Everybody's got this really good group. Everybody's got XYZ. And I don't. I'm the only one. And that's super not true.
Right. So for starting, what's the first thing we should figure out? And I'll just give this one to you, Holly. What's the question we should ask?
I mean, I think it's really important to figure out why. Why do you want to do this? What's the purpose? And that definitely goes into what we were talking about. But, you know, it's really important for anything that we do. We talk about this in business too. What's your why? So when things get hard, when things get tough, you always go back to your why. And so figuring out why you want to do this, what the purpose of the group is. And that's exactly what you talked about, you know, in your reasoning for starting groups. You felt the Lord telling you to, you felt like you wanted deeper connections, but you also felt like there was a need for this type of thing. So a couple of things that go right along with all of this is, you know, a reason to want to do this, build connections and relationships, go deeper in your faith, and introduce people to faith. So those are just a couple, but there could be a myriad of reasons, honestly, to start a group. It's just really important to define why, because that's going to, like I said, carry you through the group, and it's going to really give a focus, and it's going to help you figure out who the best people are to join the group. I mean, not that you're going to say no, but I'm saying if someone says, hey, I saw you're starting a group, I don't know if that's right for me. Your why is going to be able to tell them, here's why I started the group. If this is what you're looking for, this is a great place to come.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And that leads to the next question of who do you want to reach, right? So once you know why, then figuring out who are the people that would be the best fit for the group. Now, again, if you're doing this in the context of your church. Like if your church has a small groups program and you are leading in that context, then you're going to want to make sure you're following whatever the recommendations are for that. But often, you will be able to kind of figure out, is this a study or a group that's more for someone who's really already established in their faith and you're looking to really go deep and dig into like a really hefty Bible study? Or is this maybe for someone who's brand new and needs an introduction to faith? Or maybe it's a more of a seeker type of group that could be something that's more topical or more fun, but includes some elements of faith in it to introduce somebody or to start that conversation. So, again, it's like knowing who your target audience is. We talk about that in business too, but it's good if you know who are you trying to reach with your group so that you're not confused when you're talking to people about what the group is going to do or the purpose of the group.
Yeah, I think honestly, it goes back to kind of what we were talking about focusing. Before we were recording, we talked about focus. And if you don't have a focus, when you just say like anybody can come, that may be true, but who is this for? Yeah. So you may have someone who's super established in their faith who doesn't mind going to a group that is for people who are open and seeking. And that may be super helpful. You're always going to learn something, but it's really important to focus on that. So that leads us into choosing the actual study or curriculum. And basically what we've been talking about is going to help you in selecting your study or what the focus of the group is. So like we said, if you're looking to introduce people or you have people who are open and seeking, I mean, maybe a Beth Moore study might not be the best idea. Hers are pretty intense. Yeah. You might want something that's a little bit more seeker sensitive. You never know. Someone might want to jump right into the deep end, but figuring out where your people are at or your target audience is at is going to help you figure that out. Again, the purpose of the group and the makeup of the members are going to help impact that decision and help kind of guide you. And along those lines, are you going to do something more introductory, intermediate, more serious? These are all questions that will help you kind of vet the curriculum that you're looking at. Also, how much homework is there? I know in some studies, it's 45 minutes to an hour of work every single night. And then some, it's like you have one assignment through the week. Yeah. And I think that knowing that also helps if someone wants to figure out if it's right for them, if it's going to fit into their life. How much actual homework is there? How much of a commitment is this? Yeah. You can also ask for input from the members, but Esther wrote here that she's always found this to be challenging. And I agree with that.
It's like asking a group of people, where do you want to go on vacation? Like you're going to get 25 different answers from 25 different people. Yeah.
Or what do you want for dinner?
Right. Everybody's going to have a different opinion. So I've always taken the approach of, if I'm going to lead a group, I'm going to seek God. I'm going to try and discern and I might come up with 2 or 3 options and throw out those options to people and get maybe a voting, whatever, and go with the majority. But if I just say, hey, what do you guys want to study? It's usually not very successful in choosing a study.
I mean, if my family of 3 can't choose what we're going to have for dinner, how is your group of 8 to 10 women going to figure out what they want to study? So
one thing we didn't really talk about with this is different churches might have different kind of philosophies about groups. And so we're talking a lot here about choosing more of a Bible study focused group, which is awesome. And that's what I tend to lead most of the time. But there are churches, in both of our churches do this, where we have more of what we call free market groups, where someone could lead a group that's literally like a hiking group. And as long as they include some time for prayer and some sort of faith element into the group, then it could be considered a small group. So it's not necessarily a Bible study group, but it is a group that's focused on building relationships and still connecting through faith. And then there's other groups, other churches that might take the approach of we are only doing Bible studies, and there's a very strict guidelines on what those studies can be. So if you're leading in the context of your church, make sure that you're aware of what the guidelines are and, follow those. However, a lot of what we're sharing today, you could still start a group like just a group in your neighborhood. You could start a small group for women in your neighborhood out of the context of a church. It doesn't have to be in that context. So I just want to kind of throw that out there as like, in case you're listening, you're like, well, wait a minute. What if I want to do a group that's just like, kayaking or something?
Yeah.
I keep thinking of summer activities in Maine because that's what I want to be ready for. Knitting, like sewing. I know there's people who do like crafting groups. There's a lot of different types of groups that don't necessarily require like, hey, we're going to choose a curriculum. So just throwing that in the mix here.
And I think that that's so important because especially if you are looking to do a group that's seeker sensitive or people who are not quite mature in their faith or they're new to the faith, that's a really great segue to have an activity that everyone kind of enjoys. And then you can show someone, hey, like we can kayak and we can talk about God at the same time. That's not unusual. And that's how we do life together. So think about that too, when you're kind of thinking about the audience that you're going for. That may be a great segue for someone who is unsure about groups or is their first time. That might be something they're more willing to join.
Yeah.
So you can choose a book or a devotional, a study to go through it together. And oftentimes, I will say, if you are intimidated by leading, picking a Bible study with video lessons is really helpful because you are not doing the actual teaching. You are just the facilitator. And that can be overwhelming or intimidating for first-time leaders. So I would suggest that that's a great place to start, finding something that has video lessons and you just facilitating. If you're more mature in your faith and you can do more of the teaching, that's great. But don't let that scare you. Video lessons are a great way to start and get going.
Yeah.
So.
And I think to make sure that you do review the material before you lead the group.
Yes.
Because you do want to make sure that it is biblically sound, that the teacher that's teaching, and again, this is going to be different based on your church context. I know in our church, we do ask leaders to let us know what the curriculum is that they're going to use, because there are some things out there that we are not going to be okay with having be taught in our groups, So there's a level of, if you are going to be having a Bible-based teaching program or curriculum, you do want to make sure you are familiar with what is going to be taught. So
our church requires that you submit for approval. You have to get approval. I will say something really quick that goes right along with this. And this is something our church does. Any outside speakers have to be vetted as well. So we can't just have any random person come in and speak on a topic. Our church, whether it's the group director or location pastor, whomever, has to approve that that person can come talk. So like I know in our Bible studies before, we've had like missionaries that are coming to church. They'll come to our small group and talk. That obviously, if they're speaking at your church, they're probably fine to speak at a small group. But just keep that in mind that you want to stay within the bounds that your church puts in place.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So let's go on. I want to make sure we have time to get into the leading.
I know.
So
we've got so much to talk about.
I'm going to go through the next couple of points a little bit faster.
Okay.
So choosing the context, basically we've already said this. If your church already has a small groups program, then I definitely would encourage you to look at signing up to lead in that context, because churches who have a group program in place, they're almost always looking for more group leaders. And,
yes, we are.
Yeah. And there's usually, a need for that. Now, if there's not a groups program in your church and you are wanting to start one, especially maybe a women's group, talk to the leaders that are there. They may be really excited for you to volunteer to lead a small group, even if there's not a formal program in place. If that's not an option, like we said, you could lead in your own home. You could lead in the context of your community, somewhere else. Considering where to host the groups, I always like groups that are hosted in homes because it feels cozier. It feels more welcoming, blah, blah, blah. But that being said, almost all the groups that I have hosted for women's small groups, I've hosted at the church, partly for two reasons. One, it's a more central location for a lot of people that attend our church. And two, if I host at my home, I've got to figure out where's my husband going to be? Where's my daughter going to be? Like, getting people out of the way is harder. And then just also I got to clean out my house, make it presentable. So I often will host at church just so that it gives me a night out. I go somewhere. So that, I think it just depends on your preference and what is available in your life, in your church.
Yeah. I will say just really quick about location. I know for some of our activities groups, that can be a little bit more difficult as far as like, we have one that meets at like a specific trailhead and they all go walking on the same trail. And they have chose to keep it at that same specific trail because going around to different ones can get confusing and can get logistically difficult. So I would just say if you're going to change it up, it might be a great idea to have them all set from the beginning, give people a list right from the beginning with dates and locations so that it's not confusing. Having it be a different place and you guys just kind of choosing as the weeks go on can be difficult. Yeah. So just to keep things simple and non-confusing, try to pick one location.
Yeah.
But also like just for fun, like we had a dog parent group and they literally met at dog parks with their dogs. So like, so home and church is great, but also think out of the box a little bit too. That can be really fun and exciting for people.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I agree. We've had a group in our church that does ice fishing. They literally go ice fishing together. Not my idea of a fun group, but there are some people in Maine that love ice fishing. And so, and it was a family group. So like whole families, but they would go to different lakes each Sunday. And so, but I like that idea of kind of giving people a heads up or making sure that there's a way to communicate about it. We'll get into that a little bit later, but okay. So choosing day and time. Here's my synopsis on choosing when to meet. Pick a time and a day that works best for you as the leader. Mm-hmm. And that's when you're going to meet. Again, it goes back to the same thing. If you try to accommodate 14 different people and their best times for them, you're going to lose your mind. And so again, maybe boil it down to 2 or 3 options. Like, hey, I can do Tuesday night or Thursday night. Which one is better for you? And you get the consensus of the most people. That's what I did when I decided to just start another group. Recently, I said, okay, I'm going to do a group. It's going to be a weeknight. Let me know if you're interested. And then once I got the people that were interested, I said, these are my nights that I can do. Which one would be better? And then we chose a night. So it's much easier if you kind of have a guideline there. Another thing to do is, generally speaking, groups that have a start and an end are going to be healthier than groups that go on and on and on forever. Now, I want to give a caveat there because I think that some groups can be healthy and be ongoing, but it really takes a lot of effort from the leader to make sure that they're not becoming isolationist. And
it's a very good point.
Just, like the model that we use at our church is we want there to be times when new people can enter into groups and not feel like they're coming into kind of like a clique. And so if a group just continually meets on and on and on, and there's never a break or some sort of change up or mix up of the members, then it does make it harder for new people to get plugged in. So that's just something to keep in mind, at least having a start and end time for like, this is when we're going to start this study and end this study. Maybe the group actually stays together and continues meeting. We did that. For several years, our little women's small group that we were meeting on Tuesday nights, we met ongoing with maybe only like sometimes like a week or 2 break in between studies. But we always were open to new members popping in. We always were willing to have new people join. And then eventually the group got big enough that we had to kind of split and subdivide. So just keep that in mind in terms of time and date. So
I think the other thing too is definitely a great time for people to join when you have those breaks, but also we call them on ramps and off ramps. So there may be people in your group who actually want to take a break or need to take a break or want to do something different, and it's awkward for them to leave. So having start and end points are easy for that as well. So just think about those things when you're setting I know for us, we have semesters, so there's natural starting and stopping points. But if you're doing this outside of a church context that doesn't have semesters, just be thinking about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next thing is getting people to join. How are you going to do this? So if you're doing this within the context of your church, oftentimes there's already a process for this and how you're going to let people know about the group, how people are going to find you. But there's nothing more, I don't want to use the word persuasive, whatever but there's nothing more persuasive to someone than when you personally invite them.
Yeah.
So when you say, hey, I'm having this group, I'd love for you to join. It starts here's, personally invite people is one of the best ways. And it also lets people know that you're thinking about them and that you'd love them to be a part of it. But when you're thinking about publicizing your group, whether it's on your own or through your church, think about putting the information out in a way that creates interest and curiosity. I think about sort of not being too long-winded, but giving something for the skimmers and the people who are going to read every single word, right? So make sure that you have obviously the dates and times, what you're going to be studying, but also include how the group is going to help people move forward in a specific area. This helps people just self-identify. Yes, I need help in my parenting. I'm going to go to this parenting group. You know what I mean? So if you can easily identify what the area of growth is, it's going to help people figure out if it's right for them.
Yeah.
So as far as putting it out there, Facebook event, social media, texting, phone calls, personal conversations, all great. But make sure that if you are within a group system that you're following the rules of how they do it. I know we have a whole gigantic system for how this works. But if you are part of a small group system at your church, one of the things I found is having some type of preview is really helpful, whether it's like a night for all the leaders to kind of show their groups off, or it's a website, or it's a piece of paper that describes all of the groups, even like a week or a weekend ahead of time for when they can sign up. That gives people time to think about what's going to work for them. So having some type of preview is super helpful when you're talking about getting people to join. So
yeah, awesome. Okay, so
we've
gotten through the first part of this conversation, which is starting a group. So let's talk about leading a group. Maybe you already are in leadership and you are leading small groups, or maybe you are thinking about starting one and you want some tips on leading. So we're going to dive into that. So the first thing I would say is you want to make your group inviting. And a couple things about this would be praying for your members regularly. When you pray for people, there's just something that happens when you're regularly praying for others that when you see them, you have a different spirit with them. I think you are more excited. You're ready to hear how God is working in their lives and so on. So that's one thing, praying for your members, praying for the group itself, creating a welcoming atmosphere. I would love for you to talk to that one, Holly, because you're better at this than I am. What would make it a welcoming atmosphere? I don't know about that.
You created a really good atmosphere in our group. So when you think about atmosphere, this could include decor or food, but it might just be smiling at people, hugging them, practical things, making sure that they can get to the room okay, that there's signage. Maybe there's someone who's greeting at the door. This does not have to get complicated. So one of the things that I know I would like to do is, have decor every week and have this beautiful atmosphere. But, sometimes it's just more important to, like I said, have a smiling face, have a welcoming heart, being sensitive to people's needs, that sort of thing. That's going to create the atmosphere. And, when it comes to food, let's just say, don't get bogged down in the food. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's one of the places that a group can really get bogged down. If you want to have a sign up sheet, great. Have someone bring something every night. If you want to say, we're just going to do this loosey-goosey, if you feel like it, bring something. And if there's food, there's food. And if there's not, there's not. Do not let this be something that turns into an issue, please. Yes. It's not about the food.
Yeah. So I was talking with somebody who actually is in the group that I'm leading now, and she had seen somebody post on Facebook about their group that met, and they had created this gorgeous spread of food, like charcuterie board and just all kinds of fancy, beautiful. And it was just a special night that they were doing in that group. But like, she was like so intimidated by that, that she thought that was what it meant to lead a small group. And I was like, oh no, no, that is not required at all. That is a very, very much the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
And, I told my group, food is not going to be the thing that I'm here for. I can do the smiling and the welcoming and the, and I think that's something too, like when we talk about hospitality, a lot of times hospitality, people think of food or decor, but really I think a lot of times it is more about how you make people feel when they walk through the door and how you interact with them.
I mean, and this goes right along with what we talked about in the retreat too, like where you have it, or if you have it in a big, cold, sterile room, like if you're meeting with 5 people in a huge sanctuary, that's hard to kind of get cozy and vulnerable. But if you have a smaller room, like just think about those types of things. It doesn't have to be crazy. And, honestly, as far as food goes, it might be great to just do one hoopla where everyone brings something. You have your sort of buffet potluck one night and it's more of a social time. That way you can kind of get it out of your system, have a night for community, and then go back to it. So just think outside of the box. Do not get caught up in this. So, all right. The next one is one of my favorites.
Okay. Let's do it.
Okay, so let's each talk about these things. But one of the great principles of leading a group is setting up group guidelines. And we're going to talk about sort of different things to have as part of your group guidelines. But I'm just going to say right off the bat, start off with this week 1. Do not wait. Do not skip it. Do it week 1. Because what happens is if you don't, you'll get into week 3, 4, and then someone will do something that actually goes against these guidelines. And then it's awkward to bring up the guidelines. It's awkward to introduce them at that midway point. It looks like you're pointing someone out. Just start right off at the very beginning and give these guidelines. So tell us what the first one is.
Okay. Yes. So I always let people know that confidentiality is number 1 guideline. That I want you to feel comfortable sharing in the group and that the group will keep it confidential. Now, I say that always with a grain of salt, knowing that there is always still the chance that somebody in the group might share something, but the expectation is confidentiality. And if something were to happen where somebody started sharing information outside of the group that wasn't to be shared, that's a conversation, which we'll get to in a little bit. But like you said, if you don't start this off, if you don't start the group in the first week saying what we share in this group is confidential, prayer requests, things like that, then people will have that question mark in their head. So you don't want to have people with question marks in their head about these things. And starting it off, setting that foundation of what to expect is so important.
Yeah. I think confidentiality, like you said, is of the utmost importance because if we want people to get vulnerable, they need to have a safe space. So,
I just thought of one more thing. It's like my social work thing. It's always with the caveat that if someone is going to be harming themselves or in danger of being harmed or harming someone else, that's always if you share something like that, then I will need to share this with somebody else, so there's always that, but that's rarely an issue. So,
all right. So next one is no stupid questions. So this is a rule I think that's so good, especially when you have sort of mixed groups at different levels. Just basically that people can ask any question about anything that's unclear to them. And honestly, I think this is really important because we tend to use a lot of what I'll call Christianese terms that people don't understand. And so if you keep saying certain phrases that people don't understand and they're sitting there and they're afraid to ask the question, they're never going to get clarity on what that is. So this goes back to keeping a safe, open, vulnerable, and welcoming atmosphere. Any question is okay. Any question is, not stupid. And we don't want anyone to feel stupid or silly. So it's really important. And sometimes I will even sometimes say, hey, I never knew what this meant for the longest time. And then I found out, So sharing a little bit of vulnerability as the leader too is a good way to invite questions that people might be nervous about asking. So
yeah, for sure. Okay. The next one is be respectful. And so this is the idea that at least in our church, there are often people coming from a variety of backgrounds, a variety of denominational experiences growing up, or even before they came to our church. And so we want to make sure that we're respectful when we're sharing our views on any kind of theological issues, that we are doing it in a respectful way and not in a way that basically assumes that if you disagree with me, then you are an idiot. Like, let's not do that. And again, there are times that as the leader, there might be something that is brought up that is clearly not in line with scripture. And that still should be addressed, but it still should be done in a respectful way. And it might just be, hey, that's actually not what our church believes here, but thank you for sharing your perspective or something like that. Right. So you can do that in a way. And so just, again, setting that foundation of we're going to be respectful in how we share our views on things is key.
Yeah. So really quick before I go on to the next one, but this is super important. One of the things that we say is we avoid controversial topics like politics. Now, that's not to say that we can't talk about hard things, but the goal of our groups is to be life-giving, and no one wants to leave a group feeling like they've been beat up from a debate.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this is a great time to say, hey, thank you for bringing up your opinion. This is not really the goal of our topic tonight. Mm-hmm. So maybe we can move this on to another time, but I want to just be very clear. It's not shying away from hard things. It's more about what's the purpose of the topic and how can we grow, and how can we grow in our discernment with the Lord and the topic, all those types of things, rather than having a tete-a-tete, I guess.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's not what the purpose of the group is.
Yeah. And I think what you just said about staying away from controversial issues, that might be a good one to throw in here in the list of guidelines, because depending on the context, the time of year, the political climate, so many things, even just the whole COVID thing and masking and all of that, like all of those things can be hot button issues. And my perspective is, if the goal of the group is to help people grow in their faith and become closer with Jesus, then I don't want to be focusing on anything that's going to be a barrier to that. And if I'm sitting there, especially as the leader, talking about my view on XYZ topic that has nothing to do with growing in my faith, or that's very peripheral to that, then it's potentially going to push someone away rather than bring them closer. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
The question is really is it more important for me to push my personal conviction than it is for them to grow in their faith? What's really more important? You don't have to change their mind. It's more important that they grow closer to Jesus. So, okay, next one. So no counseling. So if you've ever done a Jenny Allen study, she's great about putting guidelines in her studies. So we got this one from Jenny. Yeah. Thank you, Jenny.
But we know you listen to our podcast.
Yes, I know, right? Well, if you ever do, thank you. So during the study, during prayer time, oftentimes people are sharing vulnerable things, and it can be really tempting to try to offer advice or counsel to people. But what really we want to do instead is to point them back to God's word and offer to pray for them. When we get into these positions, or when we get into these groups, there are going to be people that are really hurting and who need a safe place. And it's okay for the group to be one of those places, but oftentimes they may need something more. They need additional support. And so it's really important that if that were to happen, that, you're willing to meet with them one-on-one, refer them to a professional or a mentor, something like that. But oftentimes, and I've been in groups where this has happened, one person's issue has sort of taken over the group and it turns into a counseling session for everyone. And it's difficult.
Can you stop talking about me, please? Just kidding.
We both had those times.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So just remember that, again, we're coming back to, we want everyone to move forward in their walk with the Lord and their faith. And when one person's issue takes over the group, it's difficult to do it. And it's so hard, especially if someone has a catastrophic life event, for that not to happen. But let's just kind of keep those guidelines, no counseling. Let's get people the help that they need. And if we need to have a special time of prayer for them, let's do it. You know, there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I think the whole point of that guideline of no counseling or giving advice is basically that we want to point people to prayer. And like you said, this often comes up during prayer requests. So when we're taking prayer requests, we're taking those requests and then we're going to bring them to God. We're not going to sit there and try to be God for other people,
Right.
So, yeah. Okay. So the next two guidelines are kind of two sides of the same coin. So I'm going to mention both of them. We want to give space for everyone to share, everyone to talk. Some people are going to naturally talk more than others. So as the leader, you're going to need to establish at the beginning that you want everybody to have the opportunity to talk, but you're not going to force anyone to do so. But also, as you are leading the group, be looking for those times when maybe you need to say something like, would someone who hasn't shared yet like to share something?
Yeah.
Right. So then it's like just a little signal that maybe if you haven't spoken up yet, to speak up. And the thing that happens sometimes with some people is that they aren't going to speak up unless there is silence, unless there's a bit of a lull. They're not the person that is naturally eager to share. They will share, but it takes a little bit of that just like moment of silence. So my next guideline is be okay with silence. Like as the leader, don't, and I'm getting more into leadership principle, but this is a guideline too, to say, we're going to be okay with silence. Now we're not going to sit there for 5 minutes, not saying anything, but as the leader, you need to get comfortable with a few seconds of nobody saying anything without jumping in and answering the question yourself. And so that's really a key thing that I've had to learn, because my tendency has always been to just be like, okay, no one's answering. Now got to go ahead and say something. But sometimes it takes those few seconds of silence for someone to process and be able to respond. So make sure you give space for everybody to share, but also be okay with silence. So those are the other guidelines.
I have seen along those lines too, like multiple people want to talk at once, and then that's great. But there tends to be that one person who's always going to hold back and let others go first. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I have in the past, when I've seen someone start to say something and then, get cut off or someone else starts, I will let that person finish and then say, oh, hey, Esther, did you want to say something? There's nothing wrong with calling that out. And then if they say no, that's fine, move forward. But there are people who want to share, but they're not going to be aggressive is not the word. They're not going to be persistent, I guess, with that. So as a leader, I kind of look around and sort of see who's about ready to share and may have gotten cut off. That's a good place to invite them into the conversation as well. So, okay. All right. So the next one is be consistent. So this one can be a little bit discouraging, but it's normal for attendance to drop off after the first week or two. You're going to probably have your best attendance on the first night. That's just how it goes. But do your best to keep your day and time consistent and don't cancel unless you really need to. You might think that you want to cancel if only 2 people are going to be there, but they might just need to have that meeting at that exact time and maybe need a little bit more one-on-one. I had a group that was literally me and 2 other people. And I was a little discouraged. I thought I was going to have, 8 to 10 people. And, I was literally considering canceling. And one of the members came up to me. She said, I'm so excited. I really need this. Da, 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 da. And I was like, okay, we're doing this. I don't care if there's 2 people. I don't care if it's me and one other person. We're still going to do this. We're still going to go through, and I'm still going to lead this the exact same way I would lead it if there was 12 people. In other words, I'm going to put the guidelines in there. We're going to stay on topic, but it just gives more time for those people to chat. Maybe there's something that they need prayer for. It gives more time. So don't be discouraged if your attendance lags or gets lower, but don't be afraid to reach out to those people either to ask them to come back if they're available. But the best way that they will come back is if you are consistent and you're keeping it at the same date and time and not canceling. So.
Yeah. I want to just point out, we did a episode on leading small. And I think this is such an important principle to remember, that if you are leading a small group, you need to be okay if it's, like you said, even 2 or 3 people, because you could be making an impact on that one person that has no connections at the church or hasn't dug into scripture before. Like, it could be transformational for somebody. And so if you're discouraged because you didn't get 10 people, I just want to encourage you to reframe that thought. So next one is provide easy ways to communicate. So having some way to communicate throughout the week is important, just to kind of either have a text thread or a Facebook Messenger thread or a Facebook group, something where people can check in, share concerns, share needs throughout the week, ask questions. Traditionally, I've started a Facebook group for my groups, but sometimes if it's a smaller group or just a shorter term group, it might just be a messenger thread, whatever works best for you. But again, just something that will allow you to send a message if you're going to cancel one night because you're sick, like something where you can let people know if there's a change or something happening with the group.
Yeah, very important. It also helps stimulate community within the group, and it's a great way for people to share prayer requests throughout the week too. So okay, the next one is to monitor the health of the group. So this is really important to kind of pay attention to as you're leading. And one of the things that my pastor actually asked us to think about when we were going into our small groups, when we were going into church on a Sunday, was to ask yourself these questions. So who's hurting, who's missing, and who's thriving? So within your group, you can oftentimes identify these things, especially who's hurting from prayer requests or whenever you have those vulnerable moments, who's missing, who didn't show up, and then who's thriving, who's doing super well. Ask those questions and connect with those three people in between times of the group. So if you meet on Wednesdays, make it Fridays or Saturdays that maybe you reach out to those people and say, hey, I'm thinking about you, praying for you. Hey, we missed you. Or, hey, I noticed that you're doing really well. I'm so proud of you, and just encourage them. So that's a great way to monitor the health of the group. Another one that we already mentioned before is to pray for the group members regularly. Keep a running list of the prayer requests and pray over those throughout the week. Pray for the health of the group. But I totally agree with what Esther said when she said, when we pray for our members, we have a different spirit about them. And I think it lends us to be more vulnerable with their hurting places or their difficult issues. And it gives us more of a heart for those people. So that is super important. And then the last thing when you want to monitor the health of a group is help them take their next step. So do they need to get baptized? Do they need to start attending church more regularly? Do they need to go through next steps or get a mentor? What is their next step? And always invite them to take that next step and invite them to be bold in stepping out and doing that next thing. Maybe the next step is them leading a group of their own if they're a leader. Whatever those things are, encourage people to take their next steps and encourage them to self-identify what those are, and then encourage them in how they can get connected with whatever that next step is. Yeah. So that's a great way to monitor the health of the group, because we always want to be pushing people towards their next thing, and doing all these items can really help them grow in their faith.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads us to the next principle for leading, which is to develop leaders. So when you're monitoring the health of the group and you start to notice certain people are really consistent, they are solid in terms of their participation in the group, they may volunteer to help out with certain things, just be watching and paying attention for those people who are leaders already and or have leadership potential, that you could mentor them, you could encourage them, you could coach them into leading. One of the things we talk about in our small groups is have a planned absence. And as the leader, know that you're going to be absent one of the weeks of your group, and you're going to ask someone else to take over that week. So, you can be kind of monitoring, seeing who would be a good person to pinch hit for you when you're gone, and then say, hey, so-and-so, would you be willing to lead? I'm going to be away next week. Could you, facilitate the group? It's a much lower commitment for them than leading a group for a whole bunch of weeks. So it kind of just gives them a chance to test the waters. And also just know that you might need to be prepared to subdivide or grow. As you develop leaders, you might start seeing those leaders branch off and start a new group. And instead of being upset or discouraged about that, you want to actually celebrate that and celebrate the growth of leaders and additional people having the opportunity. When that happened with the group I had been leading, at first it was a little bit like sad, because we were like, oh, we're not like the same core group anymore. We're not, there's not quite the same feeling anymore. but we had to look at it as this is actually more women getting to grow in their faith, more women having the chance to be plugged in and develop in their walk with Christ. So we want to celebrate that, and more opportunities for people to participate in small groups, which is so important.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that, because that is a sign of health. If you have to divide the group, that means something's going well, you're doing something right. And it may be a little awkward at first, but just push on through and you'll get there. And you'll create that sense of community in those subgroups. So, all right, the next one is be sensitive to the Holy Spirit. So it's always important to make sure that prayer is a part of your group, opening in prayer, just surrendering the time to the Lord, and then praying at the end or whatever that looks like. But make sure that you are asking for his guidance as you lead. We are going to be handling people's vulnerable places, their hurts, their hangups, all of those sorts of things. And so we need his guidance. And so we talk about not getting derailed, that sort of thing. But at the same time, if we want the Holy Spirit to take over, we have to ask him to enter, and we need to give him the space to do it. And sometimes he will take over and something amazing will happen. So just ask for his guidance to handle hard things, to handle the certain moments, to just really speak and impact people into their lives, and ask him to do that work, because it's not us that are changing people's lives. Right. Anyway, we are not, when we start to do this, it's not, hey, I'm going to go make the difference in people's lives. No, we are a catalyst for the Holy Spirit in their lives. And that's really what this is about. So,
yeah, so true. Yeah. Okay. Last point. Ooh, we're really cutting it close on time.
I know.
This is what happens when you record and you realize you have other calls right afterwards. Okay. So the last thing is just, you know what, there's going to be challenges. There's going to be problems that come up. And so you need to kind of have a plan for dealing with problems and challenges. So one of the best things that you can do is have a mentor or a coach, a leader that you can go to that can help you walk through those challenges. So if you are in the context of your church, again, there may be a small groups director like Holly, or a small groups coach, or somebody who is your person that you can reach out to when you have challenges. Just a couple principles for this is if there's a situation that's happening in real time in the middle of the group where someone is kind of taking over, or someone is just going way too far in the weeds of a personal problem that's getting uncomfortable. Like, I don't know if you've had that happen, Holly, where someone is sharing way too many details about their personal situation. Then you will need to step in as the leader and say, hey, you know, so-and-so, I can tell you're really going through a hard time. Why don't we meet? Why don't you stick around after and let's chat? And I'd love to talk with you and pray with you. But we need to get back on track with our conversation for the group tonight. You know, and again, this takes some sensitivity, some asking the Holy Spirit to guide your words. It still will feel awkward. It's going to feel awkward if you have to 100%. Do that, but you got to be okay with awkward if you're going to lead a group. So 100%, you know, and again, just other tips are just addressing problems one-on-one. Don't call someone out in the group. If someone is, you know, if there was like a situation of gossip or a situation of just inappropriate something, don't bring that up in front of everybody. Do that in a one-on-one scenario. And again, there's all sorts of other issues that can arise. And this is where getting ongoing support training in leadership is going to help you grow in that area. So,
So I feel like you and I could talk about each one of these. I feel like each one of these things is an episode. And so I feel like we just skimmed over everything, but we gave a lot of information. A lot of information. So thank you for joining us. If you felt led to lead a group, we hope that this helps you take your next steps, because like I said, we covered a lot. But if you are leading a group, or you do start to lead a group out of this episode, we'd love to hear how it goes. So make sure that you're joined into the Purposeful Leadership group on Facebook, and just give us a post on how things are going. If you have questions, ask those in the group. We have lots of people that talk about groups in there. I've even met with people one-on-one. I'm not promising I'll do that, but I have met with people one-on-one about their groups as well. So, you know, that is a great resource.
Yeah. One more thing I want to mention before we wrap up is that we have had some growth on the podcast recently, which is super exciting, because when we decided to go back down to 2 episodes a month, I was a little worried that people were just going to be like I don't know, stop listening or something, or forget about us. Who knows? But you know what? It seems like more people have been finding our podcast and listening. So thank you if you are a new listener. Thank you if you are one of the people that has shared the podcast, because that's really the number one way that people hear about us is through one-on-one sharing. Just like we said, invitations, sharing. So thank you for that. And we appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right. In the lightning round, fun question. What is on your nightstand, Holly?
Okay. I have allergies. So tissues, water, and all the allergy medication, as well as lotion.
Okay.
And dust.
Check. Okay. On mine, I have always a glass of water. Yeah. I have lotion. I have the remote, not the remote control, but like the
clicker.
Not for TV. It's a control for my heated mattress pad that I can push on. Yes, I got it for Christmas. Super cool. I can push it on. So there's like that thing is sitting there. And then I have like some essential oils that are like roller things that I can put on if I'm, having a headache or whatever. And there's lots of things in my nightstand too, but we don't need to get into that. A lot of dust and dirt that needs to be cleaned.
Well, I have a question for you, because I always have had a book on my nightstand, but that has transformed into a pile of books on the floor next to the nightstand. Do you have that?
Okay,
yeah.
On the bottom level of my nightstand, which honestly, I almost never like end up reaching down there for the book, but the book is there. It's a nice
literally
accessory.
A stack of like 10 to 15 books next to my bed.
Oh my word. All right.
Out of control. Okay.
Thank you, friend, for being with us today. Yes. We are so grateful for you. Please make sure you're subscribed and that you're following along on this podcast so that you get the next episode that comes out probably in the next couple weeks. We'll talk to you then. Hi, friend. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. We're so glad you took the time out of your day to listen, and I truly hope that it made an impact on your ability to lead well. If it did, would you consider sharing this episode with a friend? You could take a screenshot of the episode and share it on your social media, maybe an Instagram story or on Facebook, or you could just text the link to a friend. We would truly appreciate that, as when you share with a friend, it helps spread the word about the podcast, and it helps more women to be able to be impacted so that they can lead and love others well. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.